intentionally trying to start a riot, but they were doing things that very easily could have led to a serious number of violent confrontations with the officers, which is why the police ultimately ended up.
Well, it was very hard to figure out what was going on. At first, I thought someone was injured,
Right.
but it was immediately. There was no time left, and they didn't ask us to move. They didn't do anything. They just loud crowd, or small children, elderly people, and families and friends that were having a good time, and they're usually dispersed by 12:30.
Right.
All they had to do was say, "Hey, we're trying to clear the route. Can you please go on the sidewalk?" That's all they had to flip and do. That is
Okay.
it. That
But the-
one thing.
but the
That's all
crowd-
they had to do.
The crowd would not. I don't actually believe that there was any way that they could have cleared this. If they found out at 12:05 that they were going to need to clear the street at 12:09, I don't feel like there was any way that they were going to be able to clear it. Because the crowd was not expecting it. The crowd was full of people who had no. So what I'm saying is like, and once the police were there, it basically created a standoff situation where the police weren't going to leave until the crowd dispersed, and the crowd wasn't going to disperse until the police left. And I tried to explain that to the police, and they seemed like they could not understand that they had created an extremely dangerous situation. And that those of us that were staying and not dispersing actually couldn't leave, because if we left, the only people that would be left there would be the people who weren't following police orders. People that were more likely.
But there
This
were
is a
no
common
orders
problem.
Okay.
Yeah, there were no.
Great, thank you.
So yeah.
Okay, so, wait, wait. Okay, okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
We all know that there was an assault. We all
right.
agree on that. No
So-
need for stories.
There were two.
Okay.
So was Mayday.
Okay. So, do you have another process point, or what's the? I've tried to stop the stack a couple times. So, what do you got?
It's an issue.
Okay. Go ahead.
I've been here, lived here since 1970. In the 70s and into the 80s, there was policing was community policing. Now it's talked about as something that would be nice, but it was in place.
Yeah.
The council should look at how that actually how it actually existed. For one thing, all police officers on the force lived in town. They were members of the community, and as such, they were accountable to the community as community members. So the question is, I guess the majority, if not all of the police officers now, do not live in town. I really don't know. The question is how, if we give lip service to the idea of community policing, how do we move back to that?
Okay. So here, so that's I'm going to use that as a segue because that's exactly why we're here.
Okay.
So there are many of us who have acknowledged and looked at and said, hey, there are some systemic problems. Frankly, when I heard that this happened, I wasn't surprised. And this is going to happen again unless there are policy changes that are made to make it less likely that it's going to happen. It's why there will definitely be more people killed by police officers in incidents that scare and frustrate and upset and anger lots and lots of people all over the world, because we have systems that are set up in ways that are going to lead to interactions that are not good. So there are some of us that are trying to look at these things and say specifically, how do you address hiring so that you ask questions of, should people have to live in the village? So that you look at training, so you say, should we look at things like implicit bias, or should we have training around addressing mental health issues, or whatever it might be. And then when it comes to things like use of force in other areas, that we have specific policies and procedures so that we know whether or not you handle certain situations in a certain way, and it matches our community values. There's some things we have to do by law, but there's a lot of things that we have say over. So there's efforts going on to try to work on those things. So I'd like to jump in real quick to making sure everybody here is aware of the way that the process works functionally. So I'm just going to share it very simply, and then if you have a clarifying question on that issue, or if you're somebody who works on this stuff and you know that there's something that was wrong or is missing, please jump in. But then I want to immediately then jump into these small group conversations so that people can specifically address what to do, what questions to ask for tomorrow's meeting, and what things that should be done moving forward. So very briefly, it's pretty simple. We elect a village council. So if you're a voter in Yellow Springs, you vote on a village council. Village council hires a village manager, and then the village manager administers the police department, hires the police chief, and then is in charge of the police department. That is the very, very simplistic way that the process works. Of course, there are many steps in between on many of these levels, but I want to make sure people are aware of this, because sometimes people say, let's get the so-and-so to fire the so-and-so, or so-and-so to make a change on this, and if people should just be aware that those are the basics of how the process works. So before we jump into conversation about what we can do now, and particularly the questions that folks want answers to for tomorrow's meeting that we can make sure get communicated, are there any questions about the way that governance structure works or the way that power works in the village? So I've got one over here, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And are your questions what he asked, or are you making comments?
Right.
Because what we're doing right now is asking procedural questions. Because I want to get.
Do you have a question about the process? Go ahead.
You talked about how the process of like excessive force, and you look at the people before you hire them, but if that's your thing that goes to what the town standards are, why would you hire a police officer that has been fired from 2 other places for excessive force?
Yeah. So this is, I would encourage you to say that would be the kind of question that we ought to filter up, because quite frankly, there are policies or procedures that either allow that to happen or do not allow that to happen. So if we as a community don't feel like that kind of standard should be allowed, then we should push for it to change through this power structure. So other questions about the way the governance structure works specifically? So here, and then here, and then here? Yeah.
Who has the power to dismiss or fire the police chief, the chief of police chief?
So as I understand it, and if you would mind answering, I'd be, go for it.
The village manager the chief serves at the pleasure of the village manager under section 31 of the charter.
So the council members don't have the power to fire the chief.
Yeah, they specifically
They have the
don't
power.
have the power under the village charter.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, a question about the process?
Let's
Yeah.
not block the door right there, please. Let's not block it over here.
This is procedural comment inside of this thing that you demonstrated.
My name is Athena Bannon. You may also know me as Minerva Barker. You laid out a very specific process, and a lot of people are going to go into this process with something they mentioned a lot. We need to have people move back here, and I just want to comment my piece of knowledge inside of that process that I believe one of the Supreme Courts has indicated that we cannot force people to live inside the village. So if you're going to be asking the village council to create some sort of policy, or the village manager, or whoever has that power, I'm not sure, it will have to be incentives rather than policy that says you cannot live inside the park.
Thank you. Other process-oriented questions? Yeah.
I think it was through when the village council or somebody they set up a justice committee.
Yeah.
And we're.
So we talked about that. Maybe you came in late, but there's a justice system task force that Steve has talked about, that if you haven't yet got a sign-in sheet, if you could sign up, we'll send you an email with a follow-up so you know when those meetings are hosted and what information they're working on specifically.
Thank you.
Yep. Other process questions? Yeah?
Does the village manager also work for the council at their, what is the pleasure of the
At
board?
the pleasure of the council, that's
Pleasure
correct.
of the council, so the council can fire the manager.
Yes.
It's not likely that that would happen, it'd be a good idea, but they have.
Sure. That's correct.
Yes.
Yes. Over here?
Who has the power to sanction or to fire the officer in charge, not the police chief? Is it the police chief's responsibility, or again, would that be a village manager?
There has to be a reason to discipline an employee, and there's a whole list of various types of offenses, from failing to write a report in a timely manner to excessive use of force. So it depends on what the employee is accused of or charged with, And then there's internal investigations handled in different ways depending on what
So
the.
that would be the chief of police who would
Start with the
oversee
chief of police, but the
supervisor
village manager would be involved and the village solicitor would be involved in terms of making sure the employees' rights were respected, the process was followed.
Other questions about the process specifically?
Clarifying question. When was the last time an investigation has been conducted and who sat on it? What role sat on it?
Well, I mean, with employees, it would be the village manager and their supervisor, depending on what department they were in, here, the police chief. There have been a few in the past 5-6 years, so, you know, a lot of it is not necessarily public, some of it is.
So is there a complaint-driven process for that kind of investigation? Like, is there a citizen review board, or is that what the Justice Task Force does?
Yeah, and hopefully council will have some sheets of paper tomorrow night that you can write your complaints or your comments, and some of them, if they're specifically complaints about
I'm actually on the
behavior,
Justice
you
System
should
Task Force,
say
so I can
that.
explain.
This is a complaint about police officer badge number or whatever, or name, and make a complaint. The village manager and the chief will review those and decide whether they should amount to something that an investigation for discipline should be instituted.
And so just to be clear, there is no specific citizen review board. It's one of the areas that we looked at. It's a complex topic, frankly, but it's the kind of thing that there are many communities that have them, and it might make sense. So again, just to really encourage people to stay focused on the process and the governance stuff. Hopefully this is useful for people. So we'll come here and then back over here.
Yeah, a question about the process. I mean, I guess what the concern might be is that the police are investigating the police.
Yeah.
So is there a way that we can have some kind of community, I know we have some structures, but real community input into this, and not just we write up something and it gets read, because that's been done.
Yeah.
But actual power to have an outside, and it can be an independent group of people as part of the process of reviewing this. Is that
So
possible?
the short answer is it's not a thing now, but it could be.
Well, that's my end of the question is it possible to get something like this in place or to propose it for the meeting tomorrow? And I think that's something that would go a long way to figuring out, you know, how people are accountable and what happened. And most people know what happened. There were a lot of people there. I mean, you know, I saw what happened. But it's a matter now of accountability and having trust in the system, that the system, I don't think the system is fixing itself.
The short answer to that, I mean, sorry, but I think the closest answer to that would be communicate with your elected officials, communicate with the village manager, to communicate your concern about, you know, your specific suggestion.
It's not working. It hasn't been working for years.
Well, I mean, how many people here have asked about a citizen review board in the last 2 years? I mean, and then followed through on doing. I mean, I'm just saying the number of the system might not be working, but we've got to have folks that then push to say, let's write one up and let's do it.
There were several people that were on the board that were receiving the interview and interviewing him and asking him questions. And he said one thing, and it's obvious he has done another. We need to make a change here, people.
Sure. Yeah, and so let's make it happen.
Let's add this, and he turned right around and did the opposite thing, and it's happened on several occasions.
Yeah.
Just not this time, several times. I'm talking
Absolutely.
dozens of times.
Absolutely.
We've had enough.
Yeah. So the idea here is that these systems are going to it's going to happen again unless we get together and we say, whether it's a citizen review board or whether it's other policies that change, that we specifically set up responses to this so that we don't do it again. And in the question that Kurt, that you asked about specifically tonight, like before tomorrow, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, could it happen in some theoretical sense? I suppose probably, but you know that'd be pretty fast for something to happen.
Is it possible for us to present something to the council tomorrow that requests official kind of independent group of citizens, however we compose it, to have power in the process of reviewing what happened? I mean, is that something that council has the ability to do and empower tomorrow?
Yes, I've already written such a letter.
Okay, so it's a matter of just coming up then with the actual formal proposal, or you have already, Laura?
I call it a committee of inquiry. and that it wouldn't have any staff on it. It would be, I suggest, like one person from HRC, one from Village Mediation, one from Justice Task Force, and then a few others to look at, maybe, first of all, findings, what happened, the facts. Then once you have the facts, what are the causes of those facts? And then when you have the causes, to figure out how can you prevent this thing from happening, whatever it is.
And it would be a public.
But then and then they have to make recommendations to council, because it would probably affect a lot of different aspects of government, policy, procedure, training, perhaps personnel. And so those recommendations can only be acted on by council and the village manager.
So is that something you'd be willing to share with the group that we could send out for folks to
I
review?
have it, I sent it to the clerk of council. I'm certainly willing to share it.
Okay. So we could email it out to everybody, and then if folks have
It'll be in the packet tomorrow.
Okay. So then if folks have want to organize around that, that could definitely happen. So other process or specific questions. So we've got a bunch of hands up, so try to keep comments brief.
I was on the board, the selection committee, to advise the village manager, and we asked those specific questions, and he gave answers, and the actions have not backed that up. So the evidence is already there. So it can be rather easy to show that citizens had input, asked these questions, and there has been no follow-up. And the only other thing I will say, if you're selecting from HRC and Justice Task Force and those committees that are already there, that's locking out. That's the same people involved in that.
Exactly.
Right. I think that there needs to be the allowance for some people who have been speaking but have not been enfranchised.
Okay.
That there are people left out of the process.
So
that's all I'm saying.
I want to ask folks, so this kind of this is great, problem solving of specifically what we can do. I'd love to give everybody a chance to be part of that conversation by splitting into groups. Yeah. If we can have just comments or just not even comments, just questions about the governance structure, that's it. If you don't have questions about the governance structure, then let's split up into groups so that we can talk about these kinds of things. What are the kinds of things that you want to be able to see happen for tomorrow and going forward? So we'll come here, here, and then here. Yeah.
Yes, I'm also a member of the 365 project, and as I'm sure you know, there was no time to prepare this as a group, so we're all here as individual members. But I would, I'm being undisciplined here, but I would say there are two things that are really different from what's happened in the past in Yellow Springs that we're complaining about, and the most important is there were so many people who saw it. So I would suggest, and I'm not sure quite how to do it, but everyone who saw something should lodge a written complaint for tomorrow night so that we have the mass of them with copies to this group perhaps, or to whichever groups we think are appropriate. And I think that those should indicate what we consider misbehavior of the individual police officers, but also it represents a policy from the chief of police, who is ultimately responsible, even if he was not there, even if he was not the person doing it. But he is the one who sets procedures and behavior. And so I think all of our complaints should both pinpoint what we saw, what happened, and hold the chief of police responsible. We should all write those down, and those should be circulated and presented to the commission and to the counselor, the manager. But I would also
so ideas like that we will definitely get in this next section. Go for it. Yeah.
But we can talk about it in the individual groups, but we need to we have very little time, and we need a whole group. I would also suggest, this is an unofficial community meeting, but I would suggest that we should vote on supporting this notion of a citizens review board, even if it's in vague terms that may not be tremendously helpful. It still is there are more than 100 people here. That's a big meeting for Yellow Springs. So I would suggest that before we break up, that we make a motion saying that we, as a community meeting, would like to see immediate action on a wide open citizen review board to follow up on future events.
We can just do that right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
All in favor of trying to move toward a citizen review board and working toward the details, raise your hands.